Welcome to Hoopy's Garage, the dumbest automotive channel in all of YouTube. And in all of YouTube lately, there has been a lot of talk on what is going to be the next big thing. The next car that is going to skyrocket in value, collectability-wise. And a lot of the ones listed in videos recently on Haggerty and others are cars that are already big things. Mercedes diesel wagons, for example. People are paying $30,000 for examples that already have 200,000 miles on them. Grand Wagoneers, $70,000 for low mileage original Wagoneers. I bought both of those examples over 10 years ago when they weren't valuable for less than $5,000, and now they have skyrocketed in value. They are the next big thing. E39 M5s, the next big thing. They're already big things. So I actually have an answer for you on the next big thing, and that's this. A 1994 GMC Suburban, more generally the GMT400 chassis, Chevy and GMC pickups. They are the best blend of old and new. They are a style icon, a family car icon, and in my opinion, they are very underappreciated, but not for long. But before we dive deep into the GMT400, I would like to thank Omaze for sponsoring today's video. And they want me to tell you about how you can win a 2021 Bentley Bentayga V8 and $20,000. Enjoy the absolute pinnacle of modern luxury with a 542 horsepower V8 and all of the modern comforts plus $20,000 cash just for fun. This is my pick for the best luxury SUV being made right now. I really want one. I'm just going to wait for them to depreciate a lot so I can hoopty my way into one. But if I won this Bentayga V8 and I had the extra $20,000, well, I would use that dollars to pay for gas to trailer my broken hoopties around with the Bentayga, because they are set up to tow, actually. Entering also supports a great cause, Make-A-Wish, which has brought transformational wishes to more than 330,000 children and families. Life-changing wishes wouldn't happen without the power of donors like you. Right now, for every wish they grant, there are 3 more children with critical illnesses whose wishes need you. Your support will give these children much-needed hope for brighter days ahead. So to potentially win this Bentayga plus $20,000 cash and support Make-A-Wish, go to omaze.com/hoovies. That's omaze.com/hoovies. Link below. Now let's go back to the best luxury SUV of 1994. Now, back in my dealership days, I spent 10 years in the car business before YouTubing. I worked at a Chevrolet, Cadillac, and BMW stores. One of my first jobs in the car business. I was only 20 years old. It's a weird combination of cars, but it worked. And this was a very popular vehicle to have on the used lot. The truck versions, the Suburban and Tahoe versions, they all sold very well. And eventually, when I had my own dealership, I would buy every one of these that I could, and they were very easy to sell. Nice examples were still plentiful. I would buy something like this, a 1994 GMC Suburban for around $2,500 at auction, maybe $3,000, and sell it for $5,000 like that, make $2,000, no problem. Even before I was in the car business, I was in high school. So many people had these as first cars, as hand-me-down from their parents, or they bought beater farm trucks here in Kansas. They were just so popular. And really, that popularity has never went away. It's just the supply that has gone away. Go on the internet and try and find a nice, clean Suburban or half-ton or three-quarter-ton pickup in this generation. You won't find it. And when they do pop up for sale, they usually sell very, very quickly. Well, like this one. It was traded in at a Subaru dealership and it was posted for sale, and I drove over that day and bought it immediately. In my opinion, short of the cool conversion trucks where they would do custom conversions like the vans that I have, this is the coolest factory spec of Suburban that they made. A 1994, the pre-facelift interior, but still the better interior from the original that had the weird gauges. I'll get into those details in a bit. But also the two-tone. It is just such a gorgeous vehicle, and they drive so nicely that people still want these things for daily drivers. So they want them for daily drivers. You can't say that about a lot of other people carriers back in the day. Old minivans, they drive like old minivans. People don't really want them. These, they still drive really, really nice even with age. So people still want to buy them and use them. So they're still good daily drivers. They're also great collectibles because of the aftermarket thriving, people building these trucks into really cool things, especially the single cab truck versions. Basically every segment of the population could think of something to do with this Suburban. And even though they made millions of these from the late 80s until 2000. The demand is still here, but the supply is going down rapidly, and with that, prices, they're going to start going up. Let's do a little bit of historical background before I start a tour of my new prized possession. The GMT400 chassis replaced the old square body pickup truck. Another icon, another car that is already a big thing in value, but those old trucks, they just don't drive as well and they're just not as practical. With the GMT400, they introduced things like independent front suspension. You have torsion bars instead of leaf springs. It was also the first to bring in shift on the fly four-wheel drive. You can turn a lever inside the car rather than getting out to engage the four-wheel drive. These things are much smoother, much more comfortable, but still a classic look, a classic style, and completely flat floors. You could take out the seats in the Suburban and have a completely flat storage area for work. So also would make a great work truck, even these Suburban versions, but the trucks are still excellent as well. Well, minus the trans. Now, you remember the marketing back in the day with Chevrolet saying, like a rock. Everybody alive in the 90s probably remembers the Chevrolet commercials with Bob Seger saying, like a rock, and these trucks doing work things with horses, with construction, with families. It was an iconic promotion that Chevrolet really has never topped. But Ford would beat them in sales, and that's because Chevrolet, or General Motors, had decided to split up their brand into two totally separate entities. When you combine Chevrolet and GMC, they outsold Ford every single year. So why does General Motors compete within themselves, having two companies selling basically identical vehicles? Even back then, they even named them the same. This wasn't a Yukon, this was a GMC Suburban in 1994. And there are actually several reasons for this. Well, Chevrolet was marketed towards the common American man, the heartbeat of America. Like a rock, GMC was going for that professional grade. We are professional grade, something they still use today. They marketed their trucks more towards working people who wanted to use their trucks, like they were better for work, even though they are exactly the same as Chevrolets. In more recent years, Yukons and Sierras are much more luxurious appointed vehicles than, say, base level Chevy Silverados. You have the Denali's now, there's the LTZ Silverado, but it doesn't even come close to the Denali. They're really much more luxurious trucks, but back in 1994 that wasn't the case. They really were almost identical other than the grille treatment. So the reason why they kept both was, one, because of brand loyalty. GM says that the two brands really aren't that competitive, that GMC loyalty is so strong that people really don't cross-shop it to a Chevrolet. Same goes for Chevrolet buyers. They really don't look at a GMC. They think it's just, well, overpriced, it's not worth it. So in some wacky way, this long-standing brand loyalty has just worked, but there's also one other big reason why both brands exist. And that reason is sales. If General Motors only had General Motor Company selling trucks or Chevrolet, then they couldn't sell as many because a lot of states have franchise laws that limit how many franchise dealerships you can put in a certain area. Also, Chevrolet dealers don't want to be 2 miles down the road from another Chevrolet dealer, but I guess it's okay if it's a Chevy and then a GMC dealer. Badge engineering was a pretty common thing back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where the differences between vehicles was little more than a badge, but we've gotten away from that a lot today, with the exception of GMC and Chevrolet. Very, very similar vehicles. But now I'm going to give you a tour of my latest purchase, and really, it's my daily driver right now, and it is awesome. Now, the story I got on the Suburban, and I have no idea if it was true, but the story I got is this was inherited by someone who really didn't appreciate it, and so they traded it in at the Subaru dealership for something else, and it's their loss, in my opinion. All the stations programmed on the original radio in this thing are like classic country and talk radio, that kind of stuff, so it lines up to the story, but it is my dream spec of Suburban, being two-toned, wine-colored with silver, and the only non-factory item on this Suburban is this running board that actually works as a fender flare as well. Looks really, really good. I'm missing a rubber strip. I'm gonna have to buy some kind of generic rubber and probably replace all of them so they match, but no big deal there. Another thing that makes this my dream spec of Suburban is the fact that it has barn doors. This is something you don't get on any SUV nowadays, and I think it's really, really cool. Nowadays we have those modern electronic hatches that pop when you kick your foot or something like that, and they work fine, but they break a lot. The barn door setup makes a lot of sense to me though, because you can open these doors wide enough to get anything in there that you need. With the tailgate setup, the other way they had it, the tailgate would come out to here, make loading a little bit more difficult. And of course the modern ones, you have the hatch going up, you can hit it on things. Sometimes it hits on the garage door. That hits on things and it's kind of a production. With this, if you want to load something quickly in, say like your groceries, you really only need to open one door and you have full access to load everything you need. And when you look inside this thing, look at the access, look at the space. Even the newer Suburbans probably don't have the same amount of space, even though they're bigger vehicles, just because of the proportions of everything nowadays. And look at the floor, a flat floor with tie down, something you can't get anymore in really any SUV. Now, I'm sure you've noticed the interior color already. Yes, it is red, and yes, it is awesome. Car makers don't do these bold choices in interiors anymore, and just look at this. This is why I love the pre-facelift GMT400s before 1995, when the interiors got a lot more blobby and plasticky looking. Not saying this doesn't have a lot of plastic in it, but it feels a lot more vintage and cool to me. Now the gauges are upgraded though. In 1992 or 3, they changed the gauges from that weird, I don't know how to describe it, but it looked like something out of the 50s and it wasn't that good. This is the simple orange needle setup, but look at this stereo. The stereo and the climate control are all right here, easy to reach, and then you have your tape deck and your tuner here in the center console. I was so excited to see this original radio still in the Suburban with the tape deck and the tuner, because most people take all this out or disable it and put in a radio here. This one's still in there, it still works. This is also the last year of no airbags, so this is a pre-airbag steering wheel. Looks really, really cool. You can see the shift on the fly, 4-wheel drive, and look at the font and the graphics for the 4-wheel drive. Just so cool. When you put it in 4-wheel drive, the front wheels light up. And this thing is so clean and so original, right down to the original accessory floor mats, which are in the front and the back. You see I have the baby seat in here right now. This is what hauls the baby to school right now while the G55 is down. And honestly, when I get the G55 back, I may continue hauling the baby to school in this. Now this truck only has 127,000 miles on it, which is nothing for these engines. A 5.7 liter V8. And look how clean this thing is. Also look how simple. Throttle body, fuel injection. I can see everything on this engine and everything is accessible. And not only that, but every single part made, since they made millions of these, is in stock at every single auto parts store in the nation. You could take this thing on a cross-country road trip, and even though it's almost 30 years old, it would probably be completely reliable for you. But even if something broke, every auto parts store in the country is going to have an alternator for you. It's going to have a fuel pump for you. It's going to have every single part you need, so you really don't have to worry. Now, I know there's one big but to that reliability, and that's the 4L60 transmission that is now an internet meme. And it certainly does have a well-deserved reputation of going bad. It even happened to my dad back in the day, not even 100,000 miles on it. He burned up a trans towing a small boat on a 3-4-year-old Chevy. But the rebuild cost wasn't that expensive. It's still really cheap to rebuild a transmission on these trucks, so you probably wouldn't want to trust it for towing, especially if you live in a hilly area. But it's not something that I'm really concerned myself with. And nowadays, with modern trucks, even Chevys and GMCs, there is so much more to go wrong with the engines, the transmissions, all the electronics. The fact that the only thing this thing has is somewhat weak transmissions, and that's it, is, well, that sounds wonderful compared to what we have today. And also, this thing offers a driving experience that you definitely can't get in a newer truck, even in an Escalade that's $100,000.
Oh yeah, feels so manly.
Oh yeah, so when you first sit in this thing, there's one immediate thing you can tell that is better than any new GM product, even an Escalade, and that's the seats. Even the Escalade seats, with all of their massage functions and whatnot, aren't as cushy and comfortable as this rig. These seats are so nice, and they are pretty supportive too. They're not just a pillow top, just feels perfect. For whatever reason now, car seats are made out of what feels like cardboard or paper. They're very stiff and uncomfortable, in my opinion, whereas these, oh, you sink into them, but they still have some lumbar in this car. It's just so nice. The other thing you don't get with newer trucks is the ride. The ride quality of this truck is excellent, and that's with it even having its original shocks on it. If I put new shocks on it, it would probably get even better. Michelin tires, even better. And that's because, well, because of the tires. New trucks, 22 inches looks small on a rim. 22 inches looks tiny on those things. You put 18-inch wheels on it, and it looks ridiculous. These trucks, a 15, 16-inch wheel looks appropriate, and with that you have a nice, thick, girthy tire, and people don't realize how much shock absorption thicker tires give you when you're driving down the road. So even a Cadillac Escalade with the magnetic ride control can't pull off a ride like this because it's rolling on 24s or whatever, and those little rubber bands for tires can only absorb so much. Stopping at the light here, this will give me an opportunity to floor it. The power is not there. If you need a lot of horsepower, you may not like these. Here we go. Well, it's rainy outside, so I broke the tires loose a little bit, but I floored it. This thing has a 4,000 RPM redline, which is a gasoline engine. That's like a diesel engine redline in an old gasoline engine. Something like 200 horsepower, not very much, but enough to where it accelerates into traffic just fine. You won't be driving this thing and think, oh my goodness, it is so slow. It works. It's adequate horsepower for what you need. If you want something a little faster, a little more modern, you can go with the GMT400, the new body style as they called it. Back in the day, they were actually selling this body style and the following generation at the same time, so they called it the OBS, old body style, and new body style. In 2000, 99, 98, you could get both. It was kind of a confusing time that they did again in 2007. But anyway, those newer ones, they do have the nice ride like this. They have more reliable, more powerful engines and transmissions, more luxury, more modern appointments, but they don't look the part. Like I said about these, this is the perfect mix between old and new. This thing looks like a classic truck, it feels like a classic truck, but it doesn't drive like a classic truck. And I think that's why people are going to be so drawn to these. A GMT800 looks a lot more modern, and that modern look with all the plastic, it's not going to age as well. I don't think they'll be collectible unless maybe like a really nice low mileage GMT800 Escalade or something like that. A Silverado SS, but it won't be the icon that this truck is. As I cruise down the road going 60, it feels like a car. It feels like every other modern vehicle except for the lack of technology, which to me is another big draw. I'm not that huge on infotainment screens just dominating a vehicle, and I don't see technology as something that equals luxury. Luxury used to be the quality of materials, how the car felt, how it looked, and nowadays that's being replaced with how good the infotainment system is. It's just not my thing, and it's not just the infotainment, it's the technology to make these V8s more efficient, more good for the environment. They're getting so complicated and so fragile that it makes very little sense. What V8s are left have cylinder deactivation technology that gums up, or they've gone down to 6 cylinders with turbos, and those all have problems. We're basically in an awkward in-between phase when we're phasing out the internal combustion engine and embracing electric vehicles, and these in-between engines, they're not that good. The 6-liter Vortec of previous generations, like in my big conversion van or this 5.7-liter, will be the best engine that Chevy has ever made. They can't do better. There's too much going against them to build a better, more reliable engine, so well, this is it. Oh, it's so good. The GMT400, something I really think is underappreciated right now. You can buy one of these, a Suburban of this generation, for $5,000, $7,000. A really, really nice one. And the trucks, well, they're a little bit more, about double for a really nice low mileage example, but that's still a great deal. And honestly, I don't think it's going to last. As these things get even more scarce in the years and decades to come, and the enthusiasm for them stays high, well, you know they're going to jump up in value. If people are paying 70 grand for a Jeep Grand Wagoneer that drives like an old Jeep, they're going to pay up for one of these someday. It's almost certain. Thank you for watching.